After the passing of Ray Stevenson in May 2023, his coastal home in southern Italy, just outside of Taranto, remained vacant for nearly a year. Locals avoided it. They said the place felt heavy, like something was pressing on the walls, watching from behind the shutters. The property, a stone villa surrounded by olive trees and with a view of the Ionian Sea, was quietly listed for sale in early 2024. It was eventually purchased by a British couple, Olivia and Mark Redfield, in the autumn of that year. They were in their mid-30s, both working remotely, Olivia as a digital marketing consultant and Mark as a graphic designer. They were drawn by the romantic decay of the estate and the price, which was suspiciously low for its location. Ray had bought the home a few years before his death and spent long stretches there in solitude between acting jobs. According to locals, he became more withdrawn in those final years. A few fishermen said they'd see him standing on the balcony at night, sometimes whispering to someone who wasn't there. From the first night, Olivia said the house didn't sleep. It creaked, she recalled in an interview 2 months later. But not like old wood. It was more like a body turning over in bed. They heard footsteps upstairs when no one was there. Drawers opened slightly on their own. In the evenings, the hallways would be perfumed with cigar smoke, the exact brand Ray was known to smoke. The couple chalked it up to adjustment. "It's an old house," Mark said. "It's just settling." But the atmosphere grew oppressive. Olivia began to feel a presence when she showered the sense that someone was in the room, watching just behind the curtain. Mark's dreams turned violent. He'd wake up soaked in sweat, convinced someone had screamed in his ear. In early November, Mark discovered a narrow door behind a false panel in the downstairs office, a space they hadn't noticed during the initial walkthrough. It led to a small, windowless room with dark red walls and a single, battered armchair facing a blank television. On the wall beside the chair, there were deep gouges in the plaster, like someone had clawed at it in a panic. They asked the former caretaker, an old man named Luca, about the room. He grew visibly uncomfortable and eventually admitted that Ray used it for thinking, said he would spend hours in that chair, staring at the blank screen. After that, Olivia started hearing the TV turn on in the middle of the night. A high-pitched static. No channels, just noise. And once, when she entered the room at 3 a.m., she swore she saw a figure in the armchair, tall, broad-shouldered, unmoving before it vanished. In December, Mark found a USB drive wedged inside a book on Norse mythology in Ray's library. Contained a video file. The footage was grainy and unedited, seemingly filmed by Stevenson himself. In it, Ray sat in the Red Room, speaking in a low, shaky voice. "I thought I could make peace here," he said. "But something followed me from Belfast, or maybe from the set. I don't know anymore. I talk to it now. It listens, I think. And it's hungry. I keep dreaming of drowning." He ended the video by turning the camera to the empty chair beside him. The screen went black before we could see what was there. The atmosphere turned cold, unnaturally so, even with the Italian sun outside. Mirrors began fogging without reason. The olive trees on the west side of the house began to die one by one. On Christmas Eve, Olivia vanished for 3 hours. Mark found her outside in the grove, barefoot and crying, with no memory of leaving the house. She kept saying, "He wants to come back. He wants to come back." They tried to leave on Boxing Day, but Mark's car refused to start. The battery had been drained, though it was brand new. Olivia said she saw Ray standing at the end of the driveway, blocking the path. She described him in detail down to the faded leather jacket he often wore in interviews, despite never having seen more than a few photos of him. They fled the house in January 2025, leaving everything behind. According to customs records, they relocated to Edinburgh. Olivia no longer speaks publicly about the experience, and Mark has taken a job in an office, no longer freelancing from home. The house still stands, unsold, empty, and at night, the locals say the balcony light turns on by itself. You can sometimes hear a man's voice shouting lines from Shakespeare into the sea breeze. They say the house is waiting for another performance. The late summer sun bore down heavily on the hills outside Taranto the day Olivia and Mark arrived. The villa sat half-buried in the golden light, the stucco exterior weathered by sea salt and years of wind. It was beautiful, in a forgotten kind of way, the kind of place you'd expect to find in an old black-and-white film, with shadows stretched across the stone and bougainvillea climbing the walls like memory. They arrived just past noon, the road from Bari long and winding, their small rental car coughing dust as it pulled into the circular drive. The tires crunched over dried olive leaves, and the wind, warm and irregular, carried with it the distant scent of seaweed and something older, like old leather and forgotten rooms. The house had been waiting. That was the only way Olivia could describe it. It didn't feel abandoned, even though it had sat empty since Ray Stevenson's death nearly a year before. There were no cobwebs on the doorframe, no dead birds in the gutters or broken glass on the flagstone paths. Everything was intact, preserved, like someone had just stepped out for a moment and would be returning before sundown. The keys had been left with a lawyer in town. No ceremony, no welcome gift, no note. Just a metal ring with 4 old-fashioned iron keys and a single line typed on a folded page. "Keep the west wing windows shut at night." Mark laughed when he read it. "Superstitious Italians," he muttered, pocketing the keys. But Olivia held the note longer, eyes narrowed. The paper smelled faintly of burnt wood. They entered through the front door, a tall archway painted a muted sea green, the hinges sighing under its weight. Inside, the air was cool and dense. Not musty, no. It was too clean for that. Almost sanitized. The smell of wood polish lingered, mixed with something fainter underneath. Olivia turned slowly, taking it in. The main foyer was tall and shadowed, with a sweeping staircase that forked left and right toward the upstairs bedrooms. The banister was carved oak, worn smooth by years of hands. On the wall hung a tapestry of pale blues and grays, depicting what looked like a scene from an Old Norse legend: men in longboats, holding torches as they drifted through ice. Ray's influence was everywhere. Even before she knew this had been his sanctuary, she could feel him in the design, in the low ceilings of the study, in the choice of rough-cut stone instead of marble, in the sharp angles of the windows facing the sea. It was masculine but not boastful, private, reflective. She touched the corner of a chair in the front room. It was old leather, cracked in places. When her fingers brushed it, there was a pulse of cold, sharp and momentary, like static shock. She said nothing. Mark was already dragging their bags up the stairs. They took the main bedroom, large, open, with French doors that overlooked the sloping hill down to the sea. The balcony was wide enough to host a dinner party. Olivia stepped outside and felt the wind lift her hair. The sun was setting now, dragging amber across the horizon. Below, the olive grove rippled softly. Shadows bloomed between the trunks, darkening as the light shifted. She thought she saw a figure near the tree line just for a second. A man standing still, watching. But then the wind moved again, and the grove was empty. She didn't mention it at dinner. That night, as the house settled around them, the silence pressed in. Olivia lay in bed, listening. Somewhere deep within the villa, wood popped. A beam shifted. A drawer clicked shut. At 3:14 a.m., she woke to the sound of footsteps. They were steady and slow, moving above them across the hall, then back again. She held her breath. Mark was asleep beside her, snoring lightly, his arm draped across his chest. She waited. The steps stopped, and then came the sound of a door closing. Quiet, firm, not slamming, not creaking, like someone who lived here, like someone who had done it 1,000 times. In the morning, she walked the upper hall alone, tracing the path of those footsteps. The guest rooms were empty, all but one. At the end of the west wing was a door they hadn't opened yet. A thick, black-painted thing with a rusted handle and a keyhole the size of her thumb. It was locked, and behind it, though she couldn't say how, she knew something was listening. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Olivia didn't mention the locked door to Mark that morning. Instead, she stood at the wide kitchen window, watching the breeze tug lazily at the curtains. The kitchen was tiled in deep terracotta, worn smooth from use, with a heavy farmhouse table placed directly beneath an overhead beam that bore faint knife marks. Everything in the house, she'd begun to notice, seemed to bear the evidence of presence, not just use, but inhabitation. A coffee cup had been left behind in one of the cabinets. Not antique, not even ceramic, a cheap, chipped mug with the words "World's Greatest Dad" faded across the front. It didn't match any of the other dishware. Olivia held it in her hands for a long time. There was a faint ring of brown residue along the inside. Mark had gone into town for groceries. She'd stayed behind, claiming to be tired, though the truth was harder to admit. She didn't want to leave the house alone. Not after the footsteps. Not after the door. There was something deeply wrong with that part of the house, the West Wing. Even from the kitchen, she could feel it. The hallway that led toward the closed door seemed cooler than the rest of the villa. The temperature dipped noticeably as you stepped into it, even though there were no vents, no windows open. And the silence there, it was of a different quality. Not peaceful, not calm, but taut, as if something were listening from behind the walls, holding its breath. By early afternoon, she was standing in front of the door again. The black paint was old but smooth, almost lacquered. Around the edges, the wood was paler where someone had tried ineffectively to scratch or pry it open. She touched the handle. It was cold, despite the warm air. Then she remembered the keys. They were still in the front hallway, in the clay dish on the table beside the umbrella stand. She brought them up one by one, trying each in the keyhole. The third slid in with an unexpected ease. And when she turned it, something inside the wall shifted. Not a simple click of a lock. No, it was deeper. A mechanism. Something groaning behind the plaster. The kind of sound that made her step back instinctively, like she'd just disturbed something that had settled into a long sleep. The door creaked open slowly. Beyond it was a hallway. Narrow. Windowless. The air that met her face was damp and dense, like a sealed basement. She stepped in. The floorboards groaned beneath her bare feet. The walls were lined with old movie posters. They were not framed, just pinned, tacked, some curling at the corners. There were obscure titles, 90s fantasy films, forgotten action thrillers, even a stage play flyer from Belfast in the 80s with a younger, thinner Ray Stevenson in a wool overcoat. She moved slowly, carefully. The hallway opened into a larger room, dim, with only one narrow window covered by heavy velvet drapes. Dust motes drifted lazily in the shaft of light that slipped through a tear in the fabric. In the center of the room was a chair. It was unlike the others in the house. This one was modern, steel-legged, minimal. A director's chair, but sturdier. There was a dent in the leather cushion, the shape unmistakably human, as though someone had been sitting there recently. In front of it was an old box television on a rolling cart. It was off. And beside the chair, a small table. On it, a half-empty bottle of whiskey, a notebook with pages curled from moisture, and a worn VHS tape with no label. Olivia picked it up. It was heavy in her hand. Her fingers tingled. Then, somewhere behind her inside the hallway she just walked through, she heard something shift. A creak of the floor. The faintest exhale. She spun. No one was there. But the air was warmer now. The hallway no longer felt empty. She backed away slowly, holding the tape. Her heartbeat was loud in her ears. She closed the door to the West Wing behind her and locked it again. Only when the key was removed did the silence return to its earlier tension. She didn't tell Mark what she found. Not that night. Not after the lights in the kitchen flickered 3 times while they were eating. Or when he said he heard someone humming from the direction of the hallway, low and tuneless, like a man lost in thought. Instead, after he fell asleep, she sat up in bed, holding the VHS tape in her lap. The plastic was warm, and from the hallway beyond the bedroom, the soft hum of an old television buzzed to life. It was just past 2 a.m. when Olivia finally rose from the bed, careful not to wake Mark. He was turned toward the window, his mouth slightly open, the covers rising and falling with each slow breath. The soft glow of the moon carved his silhouette in pale silver, highlighting the hollows beneath his eyes. He hadn't been sleeping well. Neither of them had. The house was too quiet. Not peaceful, not restful. Just too quiet. It was the sort of silence that made you listen harder, that made your ears reach for any trace of sound, a rustle, a breath, a murmur. And in that searching, Olivia often found herself certain she heard something just beyond her perception. A cough behind the wall, a whispered word at the foot of the stairs. She moved through the hallway barefoot. The ancient would cool against her soles. The air had thickened during the night, as though the house had drawn it inward and kept it still. She passed the old piano in the corner alcove, untouched since their arrival. Dust gathered along the keys, except one, the D above middle C, which was clean, as if it had been played. She didn't stop. Downstairs, in the den, she knelt in front of the old TV. It was a bulky Sony model with a built-in VHS slot. She remembered them from her childhood, the satisfying clunk of a tape being pulled inside, the warble of static, the strange greenish-blue glow of a paused frame. She inserted the unlabeled tape. The television hummed, and for a long moment nothing happened. Then, static. Then, black screen. And then, the faintest sound. A chair creaking. The image resolved slowly dim, grainy. A man sat in the same room she had just discovered in the West Wing, seated in the very same chair. It was Ray Stevenson, but not the version of him she remembered from films or interviews. This man was gaunt, hollow-eyed. His hair was longer, slightly damp against his forehead. He looked as though he hadn't slept in days. He sat facing the camera in silence for over a minute. Then he spoke. "I've tried not to believe in it. God knows I've tried." His voice was rough, deeper than she remembered. A long pause. He looked off to the side, toward something just out of frame. At first I thought it was the isolation. Too much time in my own head. I told myself it was the wind, the old plumbing, muscle memory from the roles I couldn't shake. He gave a sharp, humorless laugh. It sounded like gravel breaking apart. But then it started speaking back. Not with words. Not exactly. With echoes. He rubbed his hands together like he was cold. His skin looked pale, almost waxy under the overhead bulb. "I left London to find peace. I thought maybe here with the ocean, with the olives, the rituals of solitude, maybe I'd be able to scrape myself clean." His eyes twitched toward the television screen in front of him, turned off, just like she had found it. "But it waits inside this house. It doesn't leave. And now I don't think it ever belonged to me. I think I just opened a door someone else had sealed." Behind him, in the far corner of the room, the shadow shifted. Olivia's breath caught. There was something there, just barely visible, too far to make out. Tall, unmoving, like a coat rack, except it was bending slightly, as if it were listening. Ray seemed to notice it too. He froze, then leaned forward, his face suddenly much closer to the camera. The lens warped his features, made his eyes appear too large, too dark. "If you found this, if you're in my house, you have to understand. It's not haunted in the way people think. It's not a ghost." He swallowed. A tremor passed through his jaw. "It's something that grows roots. In the walls. In your mind. In the air. It's memory that's gone bad. It learns you. And once it does." The screen went black. Then a second later, a frame. A still frame. Of the hallway outside the West Wing. Except it was now. Same vase. Same wall sconce. Same runner rug. And in the hallway stood Olivia. She gasped, recoiling from the screen. The frame was frozen, but it was her. Her hair. Her robe. Her posture. She looked to the TV again and the screen blinked. The hallway was now empty. Then the camera, somehow still running, turned slowly toward the door of the West Wing. Olivia rose from the floor. The house was utterly silent again, the kind of silence that vibrates. She stepped back, hands trembling. Behind her, something moved at the top of the stairs. She turned too slowly. There was no one there, but she could smell something new in the air. Cigar smoke. Faint. Old. Familiar. She didn't remember Mark ever lighting one. The following week unraveled fast. Olivia stopped sleeping. She paced the villa at night, whispering things to herself that Mark couldn't hear. He found her once in the West Wing, seated in the chair from the video, staring at the blank television. The screen flickered dimly, though the power was off. Mark tried to take her back to town, but the car wouldn't start. The battery was drained completely, impossibly, despite being brand new. The phone lines crackled with static. No signal reached past the grove. On the third night, he awoke alone. The bed was cold beside him. Olivia's side untouched. He searched every room. She wasn't in the kitchen. Not in the garden. Not on the balcony. He found her in the hallway outside the west wing, standing perfectly still, her hand on the door, her head tilted slightly as though listening to something behind the wall. "Liv," he said quietly. "Let's go. Now." She turned to him slowly, eyes wide and vacant. "He's not gone," she whispered. Then she opened the door. Inside the west wing, everything was different. The room was full of smoke. Not fire, just thick, choking smoke like from a cigar left burning too long. The walls pulsed. The television flicked on by itself. Ray's face stared back at them, lips barely moving. It only stops when someone stays. Mark stepped backward. Olivia stepped forward. "Liv," he said again. She didn't answer. She crossed the threshold and pulled the door shut behind her. It locked from the inside. He never saw her again. The police found Mark a day later, wandering the road in a fog of exhaustion and grief. The villa was empty when they searched it. No sign of Olivia, no trace of the tape. But the door to the west wing was locked, and warm to the touch. And somewhere behind it, late at night, the sound of a chair creaking could still be heard. Over, and over, and over again. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.